Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today we are joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, four times combat veteran, recipient of the Bronze Star Medal for Valor and the Bronze Star Medal for Service. And also, yeah, the host of the very popular YouTube channel, Daniel Davis Deep Dive, which I highly recommend. So, welcome to the program.
Certainly a pleasure to be here, Glenn. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to discuss, of course, the war in Iran with you today. As as NATO countries, we fought many wars over the past 30 years. However, Iran appears to be a very different country than Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, or any of the other countries which have been at war with. But what is it that people you believe don't understand about Iran, or which just should know at least about its military might or yeah, position?
Yeah, I think that the one thing that is being intentionally hidden from most Western audiences is the fact that Iran has a very effective ballistic missile force, and we're now seeing it play out. And actually, if we were paying attention, we would have seen it in 2024 during the two rounds of missile and drone fire between Iran and Israel, where I think that Iran very clearly communicated that they have the capacity to penetrate the elaborate air defense, the complicated system that Israel has, and that if Iran wanted to, they could penetrate that. They showed that by some very selective means of attack in 2024 in April and in October. In addition to firing slower moving drones or older cruise missiles or things that they knew would be shot down because they were trying to signal they wanted to avoid war. They did not want to escalate, but that if Israel went too far, they have the capacity. Well, that was proven valid because now then you're seeing when Israel launched this unprovoked war a week or so ago. Now then, Iran has no incentive to withhold its lethal stuff, and now that it is pummeling, even as of this morning, significant targets inside of Israel, and they have lost some significant targets. A couple of specifically research facilities. Most of this stuff is just not getting through to the West, and we keep telling this fiction that the Iron Dome and the David Sling and the THAAD system is intercepting nearly everything, but some stuff gets through. That's the narrative. But then you look on the ground and you see, no, it's not. Hardly anything is being intercepted, and most of it is getting through, and it's causing a lot of damage inside of Israel. So the question is, how much longer can this go on? Because the reverse is also true, because most of Israel stuff also gets through into Iran. So this is like a couple of heavyweights, frankly, and just getting body blow after body blow. And it's the question is going to be, who has the most offensive missiles? Because while the Israeli side has air supremacy inside of Iran, Iran also has military missile supremacy inside of Israel. So both sides are very vulnerable. And I think that's the big takeaway right now, that this is a glimpse of what modern war can look like. And the side that has the most interceptor missiles and the side that has the most offensive missiles is going to be the side that has an advantage.
Yeah, I think well, I'm a bit critical why we tend to believe all the stories or narratives being pushed in the media, given that Israel has put this censorship on allowing to show the damage being inflicted upon it. So if take that large steps to prevent anyone from getting insights into the damage, why would you believe their casualty numbers or yeah, their reporting? It kind of contradicts it, but uh, I agree though with this the limited attack we had a while ago, where Iran sent its old drones, and when it was all shut down by Israel and its partners, there was a bit of a hubris going on, a bit, assuming that the Iranians were weak, they couldn't retaliate in any ways. I'm wondering if that retaliation from Iran was so weak that it actually might have emboldened Israel. But what do you see happening on the ground then? Was it that Israel was simply unprepared? Why did they underestimate Iran? And
Well, yeah, see that's why I say, and let's go back to the to two rounds in 2024. If you did a careful analysis of the attack patterns, especially that first one in April, Iran very clearly communicated what it was going to do. Reports say that they both told the U.S. and Israel what was coming. They started off with these long drone flights, which took hours to do, so everybody was ready. All the American air power was in the air. The Israeli Air Force, I think, Jordanians and several others were there. Israel or Iran wanted Israel to know this is coming because they did not want to escalate, but they very clearly communicated ballistic missiles into an airbase, especially in that second round, that showed your system isn't going to stop this. So that should have been a clear message to Israel that, hey, I don't want to escalate this, but if you take this path here, we will do this. And I can only imagine that that message was directly communicated probably behind in back channels or certainly off the public spheres. I can't imagine they wouldn't have done that. So the question is, why did Israel ignore that? Whether they were directly told or whether they just refused to accept what the analysis showed. I don't have enough information to know on the Israeli side, but it is curious because it could be that they just didn't think Iran would do it. Maybe they thought because Iran, after Israel blew up their embassy, which violated, every historical norm that you can imagine international relations. The Iran's response was fairly tepid. I mean, I think you can say that they responded, but in a way that wouldn't cause any real harm to Israel. Perhaps Israel thought that's just how they're going to be. So if I hit you hard again, you're still going to have a small response. I think that's probably the most plausible, that Israel just thought, no, I can bring all my power to bear. And I got, Uncle Sam over my shoulder, and he's going to come to my rescue if you get frisky. So maybe they thought that they could just coerce in Iran. And maybe they also thought this message that we sent by Hezbollah, also last year, where they assassinated Nasrallah, and all the just decapitated all these senior leaders, and maybe they thought Israel thought that message to Iran was that we could do the same to you, so you better stay in your box. I think that the hubris and the assumption that Iran had no red lines and they could be pushed back forever, I think led to a poor decision by Israel. And look, to me, from my assessment here, Israel has started a war that they don't know how to end. Because if they didn't get a quick decision, if they didn't get a regime change right away, now then they're left going, and now what? What if Iran just hunkers down and keeps firing these missiles at some pace? And nobody knows for sure how many missiles they actually have. But as we saw again this morning, I think there was a round of 23, and quite a few got through and caused a lot of destruction in Israel. We don't know how many more rounds of those they have, but they clearly still have them. So what is Israel going to do now? What is their trajectory to end the war if they don't either decapitate the leadership, or if they don't take out the nuclear capacity, then what? And I don't think Israel has an answer for that, and I think they're scrambling right now.
I think in the war, perceptions mean a lot. That is, if you think the opponent has a powerful deterrent or can intercept your missiles, then yeah, well, people will act on those perceptions. And I guess the Iron Dome has really been talked up so much that I think even Israeli leaders might have been under the assumption that nothing could get through. But we see this strange rapid decrease of the interception rates of Iranian missiles. Is this simply the missile defense of Israel running out of interceptive missiles? Is it the Iranians using better missiles? How are you reading the
No,
situation?
see, I think it was always a myth that the Iron Dome got, this 90%. That's what they claimed. I don't think it was ever true of the missiles. What it was true of is of the slow-moving cruise missiles or the drones, and that is it's still capable against right now. But we have always misunderstood what the Iron Dome or the integrated air defense system, because it's a lot more than just the Iron Dome, what that actually took down in 2024 on those two rounds. And that's why I say when you did an analysis of the ballistic missiles, the integrated air defense system at that time only hit a handful, just a very small number. And Iran didn't fire that many of those. They fired a whole bunch, hundreds of the drones, and those were a significant portion of those were shot down, but not the ballistic missiles. So it's not that it's intercepting fewer now. It's that Iran is now. I've only seen a handful of drones even been fired into this, and so far it's been primarily missiles, which the system won't intercept.
Well, there's not much if they're now stuck in this war of attrition in which, as you said, they're just these two giants hammering at each other, or it all depends on the amount of missiles they have and the amount of punishment they're willing to absorb or capable of absorbing. Well, how does this play out next? Because has this effectively forced the United States to enter the war? I know Donald Trump said he will think about it for 2 weeks, but this could also be a ploy to let the Iranians lower the guard while the U.S. moves its assets around more freely. Do you think the U.S. will go in, and if so, would they wait 2 weeks, or can we expect
Well,
something this weekend?
I'll just tell you, Iran is not going to lower its guard. They're not going to. They're not going to take anything anybody says at face value. Certainly, there's no trust whatsoever. So, if that's the intention, they're going to be sadly mistaken. Rather, though, I think there's some different things behind this. From several sources that I had here in Washington D.C. That have access to senior administration officials, they claimed that the decision had been made and we were going to launch something at Fordo and possibly other airstrikes in the country before this weekend was even over. But then something changed, and now you saw that really surprising notice, which caught most of my sources by surprise, that he just said, we're going to wait 2 weeks before we make a decision. My assessment, based on what I can see and what I've heard, is that we weren't ready to launch war. I suspect, and I don't have a source on this, but this is just me reading the information. I suspect that probably the field commander, whoever's in charge of the forces in that region for this operation, said, we're not quite ready yet. We need some more. There's a bunch of it C-17s, C-5s, all kinds of material, war material, and logistics to sustain, like an air campaign has been going from the United States into Europe and elsewhere in the Middle East. You've had a large number of like dozens of aerial refueling tankers. You have lots of ships. There are 3 aircraft carrier strike groups either in or steaming toward the region. Aegis ships. I mean, just all kinds of firepower from the United States. I think maybe they weren't ready yet. There's also been some reports that a lot of the air assets that we have in Qatar are being moved off. Probably, I think it could well be because they want to get them out of harm's way before we start launching, because they'll just be sitting ducks there and they'll be easy targets. And I think that they want to get those out. There have been a number of these small isolated bases the U.S. has in Syria that have either been consolidated or the troops just withdrawn here in the last number of days. So it could also be that we're trying to limit our exposure to any kind of Iranian retaliation, because let's make sure everybody's clear on this. The same system, the same integrated system that has been so porous to Iranian missiles in Israel is just as porous for us. So our forces, whether that's in Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, etc., all over the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, they are vulnerable just like Israel is. And if we go to war against Iran, if we strike the Fordo facility, for example, with this bunker buster in an attempt, and I say attempt, to take out that nuclear reactor there, and who knows whether we could get it or not, but just making the attempt is almost certainly going to elicit a response by Iran against our troops in the region. And we have like 40,000 troops, so you can't get them all out. You can reduce your exposure, but you're not going to eliminate it. So it could be that Trump was just saying, hey, we're not quite ready. Let's get a few more resources and assets in place, at least consolidate and limit our exposure that we have there, increase the air defense, because we can shoot something down, even if a lot of it's going to get through. That may be happening, which is, of course, not good news, because then that means that the war is just pushed back a couple of weeks instead of starting in a couple of days. Now, my hope is that this kind of analysis, that there are people inside the administration that are telling the president, don't take this action. It won't work, and it will spawn a regional crisis, and you'll have a war on your hand that your supporters voted you in office not to have. And then you're just going to be seen as a failure and a loser. Maybe that got through. And so he's like, all right, well, let's try again with negotiations. And I saw the Iranian foreign minister just hours ago reiterate that they are willing to negotiate. They are still open to negotiations to get this resolved by diplomacy. So that is not forestalled. So I'm whatever time frame is in window is actually provided here. I hope we take advantage of it, because it is still possible to end this ridiculous war between Israel and Iran right now and prevent it from escalating further. I hope so.
well, I think it could be both things, because on one hand, you do see that there has been not the proper preparedness for this war. That is, a lot of these assets being shifted now. They're not even coming from out of America's supplies in Europe. They're coming all the way from the United States. So obviously, they were not prepared for this. On the other hand, I think Trump also faces much opposition from his own base and his own team, to the extent that he might be reconsidering this. I'm just wondering if Iran might, if it sees too many assets being shifted around, if it would choose to do a preemptive strike, that is, yeah, have the benefit of hitting first. On the other
Yeah,
hand,
no, I don't see any chance of that, because there is a substantial amount of power, and Trump could bring just devastation onto Iran that would be just very, very painful to them. So I think if there's any chance to have a diplomatic way to avoid any American bombs falling on Iran, I'm sure they'll take it. But then, because there's very little to gain and a great deal to lose if they do a preemptive kind of situation. So I just don't think that they would take that, because there's too little chance to succeed for them. I will point out one other thing, though, about the Israeli side here and their decision to launch this war a week or so ago. This just shows a continuation of some really poor strategic decision making in Tel Aviv. We always, here in the West, we always give, all this 4D chess or 3D chess mentality to the Israelis, and say they're brilliant and all this kind of stuff, and they're really good at a lot of stuff, especially in their special forces. The Mossad or whatever has some genuine, substantial statecraft and warcraft that they've been doing. But on the decision making, it's been awful. For example, when they went into Gaza in the latter part of October 2023, I at that time said, you are embarking on a military operation trying to use lethal military force to accomplish a political objective, peace for Israel, that is not going to work. All you're going to be doing is buying more insecurity for yourself. And that's exactly how it's played out. And now, here, after almost 2 years of fighting, they're no closer to ending this now than they were at the beginning. Allegedly, there were somewhere around 40,000 Hamas fighters when the war started. And now then, after all this killing and destruction by the Israeli sources about a month ago, they admitted that there's still about 40,000, because no shock here, that's all the men especially, who have survived this bombardment, and their families and their women and their children who have been killed. It now self recruits, and they replace all the losses. So it's not even mowing the grass, it's just creating more enemies. And I personally saw this in my time in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and now it's playing out on a larger scale here. Israel doesn't seem to know how to get out of this situation, and now then they've started a new one, and there's no clear way to get out of this one either. So this is a real problem that Israel's got to do a lot better job of strategic thinking and making sure you have a chance to succeed before you start to fire missiles.
yeah, this is, I think, shocking to many people after, the failures in Gaza, then Lebanon, then Syria, then Yemen, and then really move on to Iran, which is just madness, it seems. But if you were planning, though, if you were involved in the planning on the strike on Iran, how can this be done, though? Because you can't really move many ground troops in, because it's quite a mountainous region. I'm not sure how it would work. Can this be simply done by naval and air power? And how would they come in? Wouldn't Because the Persian Gulf can be closed down, and it's unclear to me if a country like Pakistan, for example, would assist with shooting down missiles aimed at Iran. I mean, how would this simply be naval power and air power coming down from the south, or how would this work?
Yeah, that's the only thing that's being contemplated right now is naval and air power. And you just can't win wars with just naval and air power. You just can't. I mean, that's one of the things that the Russia-Ukraine war is showing, that you can have incredible amounts of drones and missile power, air power, et cetera, and it can be just causing incredible devastation. But if you don't have somebody on the ground to either take or hold territory, you're not going to go anywhere. You're just going to blow a bunch of stuff up. That's what we're facing here. I don't think anyone in the West is even contemplating any boots on the ground, period. They just want to blow stuff up. They want to say, well, we want to either degrade the regime. You know, they hit the IRGC sites, hitting their military sites. Of course, they've been assassinating civilian scientists, et cetera, taken out a number of senior regime officials, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the whole alleged point of this was the Iranian bomb making capacity for a nuclear weapon should they decide to go get that. And so they wanted to just hit a number of these facilities. Well, that's complicated. First of all, we'll look at Fordo because it is so far underground, somewhere around 300 feet. And the best of our bunker busting capacity is the GBU 57, which can allegedly go down to about 200 feet. So you're still 70, 80 feet, 100 feet, depending on how deep it actually is, still can't get through there. And as Ted Postal said on our show, MIT professor, just yesterday, he had this brilliant description of how the Iranians have likely created the defensives under the ground with a lot of granite that has shifting shapes and whatnot, so that even this penetrator, it's not just going to have a nice little easy trajectory straight down, because it's going to be deflected and redirected because of the way that the formations have been built. And so it may not even go down 50, 75 feet. We don't know because it's not been tested in ground combat conditions, but it's pretty likely that it won't function the way we think and take it out. So you're going to have a lot of creation, a lot of problems. You can blow up the entrances to the tunnel. You can have a lot of, definitely destroy a lot of stuff on the surface. But in terms of where those centrifuges are, you probably aren't going to succeed on that. You also have the Bashir site, where Putin yesterday or day before said, hey, I got about 250 Russian scientists there. They're going to stay there, and we might even bump that up to about 600, and we're not going anywhere, meaning do not attack that facility, or you can potentially be drawing us into a war. So I hope that nobody in either Israel or Washington is going to be foolish enough to attack that site and potentially bring Russia in a military way. So now then, here's two big facilities that you probably can't knock out on the one hand, and you shouldn't even take under fire on the other, which means that you're not going to be able to conclusively say we destroyed Iran's ability to rush to a bomb should they decide to do so. And I have to point out too that this allegation that we've been trying to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, all of our actions have been shoving them in the direction to have an incentive to go to a bomb. It well may be, and we don't know this right now, that at some point they say, okay, the Iranians, because of all of this, the only thing we can do long term to guarantee our security is to rush to a bomb. And I think the IAEA Secretary General, I think his name is Gossi, just this morning said on a Fox News interview that Iran has enough material right now that they could reprocess into some number of bombs. But he said they still have not made the decision to do so, which corroborates what Tulsi Gabbard said in March. And so even now, they still have not done that because there are still some inspectors on the ground there. But ironically, that if they choose to do it, they would only have done so because of all these actions. So far from preventing them, this could actually push them in that direction. And of course, if that happens, then we're in a very different world. Then, if one day all of a sudden Iran secretly tests a nuclear weapon, and God only knows what would happen then, but that's how perverse these operations are, that they won't stop the thing that hasn't started, but could push them in that direction. That's the perverse nature of what's going on here.
I was in Iran a few weeks ago on a conference. I did visit one of these nuclear facilities, and the one thing I
Mm.
heard from a lot of the Iranians was, it's simply not in our interest to have a nuclear weapon because then the Saudis will get maybe Turkey, and suddenly with this proliferation, their security would be diminished. So it's better to keep it, yeah, prevent from going this way. But as you say, if they fear for their existence, they might take that route anyways. And this is why it's so seems so foolish to try to bomb a
Fascinating.
country into giving up its deterrent. I mean, this is when you need a deterrent. But you mentioned the possibility of pulling Russia into this, and I've seen reports. I haven't seen it verified anywhere, but that there's been Chinese flights landing in Iran without their transponders on. Again, I'm not sure if they're evacuating people. Some are speculating that they're delivering weapons for Iran to, well, again, defend itself. Yeah, I see that as being very likely. Also, I'm not sure if the Russians are supplying weapons or at least providing intelligence. But what is the wider challenge here of pulling in or risk of pulling in other great powers, be it China or Russia, as you said, or of course India wouldn't intervene in any way, but even they are quite upset about the disruption to their energy supplies, and so how do you see the possibility for escalation here?
Yeah, that's the big concern because these things are always connected. You can't just look at the Middle Eastern situation or the Israel Iran in an isolation, or even the Russia Ukraine war in isolation, or what's going on in the Indo Pacific with U.S. and some of our allies and China, et cetera, over potential Taiwan South China Sea issues. Some of the small islands that are disputed, et cetera. I think that there's potential. There's currents running back and forth between all of these because you have obviously Iran being a member of BRICS. You have China who benefits a lot from the oil that you refer to there. Russia obviously benefits a lot from the drone technology that they have been getting from Iran. So they both have incentive for there not to be a regime change, and they have motivation to want to prevent that. It's unclear how far that they would go, but it seems unlikely to me that they would literally do nothing and allow the United States and Israel together to knock out the Iranian regime, which would then put all of that oil at risk, would put all of it would end the military technology and the other facilities that the Russians have there. So seems likely that if push comes to shove, they may shove back, or they may start openly providing ammunition or interceptor missiles or offensive missiles. We don't know because obviously we've kind of set the standard in Ukraine that we give all kinds of lethal aid, to include long range weapons, to Ukraine to kill Russians there. So it's not at all, it wouldn't be out of the question at all for Russia to repay the service and say, all right, now we're going to start giving these to, especially if the U.S. enters the war, we're going to now help Iran because that's what you've done here. And they're going to, because we're going to give them some of our stuff that's going to help them kill Americans, or you're going to help them kill Israelis if that's the case, if we go in this together. So there's a lot going on here. We also know for sure that there was a phone call between Putin and Trump just a couple of days ago. We don't know that there wasn't any full readouts of that, so we don't know for sure what was discussed in that. But one would imagine some of these conversations were going on, and who knows, maybe that's part of what prompted Trump to say, okay, I'm going to wait 2 more weeks to see where we can go with this. I, again, hope that's the case because that would imply that some sanity is getting into the decision making. And instead of going down a military path, we may say, it's better now if we go down the diplomatic path and get this war off the table so that we don't have the risk of escalation and advancement and bringing others into this fight, which is a lose lose for everybody.
It has to be said, though, how this relationship between the Israelis and Russians have collapsed. I remember I spoke to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, in Kazakhstan back in 2018, and he was making the point that there were kids that would all learn some Russian words because of Russia's role in, saving yeah, a lot of the Jewish people during the
Yeah.
Holocaust, liberating Auschwitz and all. But and this was his argued that translated into some mutual respect, even when they're on different side of the conflict, such as in Syria, where they yeah keep each other informed, and yeah, there's a limit to what they're willing to do to each other in terms of yeah coercion. But what you've seen over the past few years now, with Israel first supporting um, yeah Ukraine in the resulting in the killings of many Russians, and then of course Iran in contrast, coming to the aid of Russia by supplying weapons, the whole dynamic has shifted dramatically. So it's that whole relationship has been thrown away, it seems, and I think Russia's much more comfortable to lean more heavy towards the Iranian side against Israel. Um, but what do you see happening though if Israel would lose too heavy? Because Trump has said, he will only accept surrender. Again, he can change his mind tomorrow. That's, I guess, one of his gifts, if you will. Not many politicians are capable of getting away with this, but
Yeah.
he could change his mind. But if Israel doesn't want to accept, this humiliation of having lost the war and forced to negotiate, what options are there? Is there either getting America on board or dropping a nuclear weapon? Do you think it's possible that Israel could go that way, or is that would that be too much?
Right now you can't take anything off the table about what's possible. And that I think that we do need to examine the possibility that Israel may choose to use one of its tactical nuclear weapons, especially on the Fordo site. uh, it would have seemed to have been unconscionable that, and the irony of Israel saying that they're going to war to prevent the escalation of a nuclear weapons program for Iran, and then end up using nuclear weapons to prevent that in the process. Uh, but in the event that Trump does back off of this, and you mentioned that Trump's changed his mind, man, just since the early part of March, on March 7th from the White House. He said, "We are days away, folks, days away. We're in the last strokes here before something's going to happen in Iran. Either they're going to agree to my deal or bombs will be falling, et cetera." He said around the same time there. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, suddenly, now he's all of a sudden saying, "Hey, let's go with diplomacy." And then you have Witkoff going to talk to the Iranian delegation. He comes back and goes on Fox News one night on a certain Monday, I remember, and he says, "Hey, we've had some good progress here, and Iran doesn't need to go anything more than 3.67% enrichment. That's just for basically what the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, will allow." Every country that's a signatory has that right to do. So they don't need to do anything more than that. And then, from reports that I've had, that freaked out a lot of people in Israel and a lot of the hawkish group in the United States in Trump's inner circle. And suddenly Witkoff went out the next day and said, "Well, actually, no percent reprocessing." And then again, Trump's still talking about a negotiated settlement. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, then he changes it to says now it's a red line. There's 0% reprocessing capable, or we're going to solve it another way, et cetera. So it looked like he went way back to the hawkish where he was in the early part of March. And, we know where we are now. Then he's ready to have unconditional surrender that you said just a couple of days ago with no explanation. And then all of a sudden, now here's 2 weeks. It's what's going to happen at the end of that. What's going to happen during this 2 weeks? There's been a bunch of deadlines that he's given, and they don't mean anything because he just either extends them or ignores them or makes new ones. So we don't know if this really means 2 actual weeks or just until his mind gets changed again. So that's not helpful to try and get a resolution on this when everybody has to wonder, where is the United States today, because they could be somewhere different tomorrow, regardless of what they've said. And in the event that Trump finally comes to the conclusion that enough of his advisors are giving him the warning that this could go really bad for us and we still wouldn't succeed with our bunker busters, then Israel may say, "Okay, then we'll handle it our own." What worries me a little bit is that you had Tulsi Gabbard come out a week or so ago and when she went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and she published this video that, according to the New York Times, was not authorized by the White House, made the president unhappy, and was warning just in general about the real dangers of nuclear war and what would happen if a nuclear weapon was used, and how today's explosions are a lot worse, a lot more powerful than the past. And a lot of people were kind of going, "What prompted this?" And one has to wonder if there was some talk somewhere, especially in some of these Israeli circles, that they were contemplating this. Because if the U.S. doesn't go in there, or even if these GBU 57s don't work, then what's left for Israel? They may choose to actually launch such a weapon here. And what has me concerned recently, maybe even yesterday, Israel was asked, okay, well, now that Trump's put in this new, delay, what if he doesn't come in at all? Does that mean your operation to make sure that Iran doesn't go get a nuke is off the table? Then said, nope, we'll take care of it on our own. We'll solve it on our own if we have to. And that's kind of a head scratcher because they don't even have a GBU 57 capability. I think the bunker busters they have are quite shallow in comparison to the 250 or 300 feet allegedly that the Fordo site has. So one has to reasonably ask, what do you plan to do then? If your bunker busters, for sure won't even come close, what else will you use if you want to make sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon? And I fear that there are some that are willing to consider the use of a nuclear weapon. And I'm just telling you, our world will radically change, never to go back the day that any nuclear weapon is used somewhere, because all the conditions are changed at that point, and the calculations in minds all over the world are changed. And we better hope Israel doesn't do that. And I think President Trump should really knuckle down and put pressure on them not to do that. He should definitely take the negotiating opportunity here. The Iranians are willing to do so. There is a deal that can be reached that can at least provide some stability in the region. That is within our grasp. It is possible with all the parties, as long as Israel doesn't be the wild card and escalate things out of control.
Yeah, this unpredictability of Trump, though, I think, it's very deliberate because it's been referred to many times that you shouldn't be too predictable when you're negotiating, that you shouldn't lock yourself in a position. So this strategic ambiguity seemed to be part of the negotiation tactic. But
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
let me just, because I
yeah,
hear that a lot too, and that's a double-edged sword.
yeah.
If you want to have a good outcome, there is a case to be made that you need to be predictable. That you need to. There's the other side's got to have some confidence that if they reach an agreement, that you're going to abide by your side as well. And being irrational and erratic does not build trust, which means it could make it harder to get a negotiated settlement, not easier, because this idea is that everybody in the world has to be made to fear what we may do. And that's not what motivates most people. In fact, usually fear puts them in a direction to do things that we don't like. I don't know, like firing ballistic missiles into Israel and all over the region here, because out of fear that they may be the next one on the regime change chopping block. So I reject that idea that somehow that's a good thing. I don't think it is.
No, actually, I was getting to that because
Sorry.
in economics and international security, you do want predictability. Without the predictability, as you said, the opponent will act in a very unfavorable way, and you see the tendency to pull out of arms treaties and or even launch surprise attacks in the middle of negotiations. I think the negotiation tactics for real estate would be very different than in international politics. But my last question is then more about how you see the narrative control here, because we see, for example, in the war in Ukraine, it's fought on two levels. One hand, it's on the ground, but the other is to control the narrative. That is, who's winning, who's aggressive, who's the victim. If you can control this, you can keep at least public support going for the war. But there wasn't much efforts being put into the war in Iran. Indeed, it looks like Trump undermined his own narrative by arguing, Iran was ready for a deal, they're very close, and then, and then striking in the middle of negotiations. So, how do you see this as an important variable, or how are you assessing this?
Yeah, it is a you can't change it. It is a feature of the modern world, and everybody is engaging in it to one degree or another. Uh, the reality is that it distorts people's understanding of the world around them. That makes them believe one thing when there's something different could be true on the ground. You mentioned the Russia-Ukraine war. That's happening all over the place. We believe that we could make Russia lose, and we just need a little bit more pressure, a little bit more ammunition. But a sober military analysis would have informed anyone from the beginning that this was militarily unsolvable for the Ukraine side, and that given enough time, the Russians have the resources and the capacity and the manpower, definitely the political will, to eventually succeed, and they're going to. And the same thing is the case here, is that if we keep believing that the Iron Dome is this nearly impervious shield over Israel. That's going to give them the confidence that they can take all kinds of risks because they think that if you do something, we'll be able to shoot it down. And so that gives the idea that other people can encourage them to go down this path because they think that Iran is weak. They don't have an Iron Dome of their own. They have antiquated air defense. So that means that we're protected, you're not protected, so we can do what we want and you can't do anything about it. And then we'll take out the, etc. All this is based on an impression, a narrative, when the realities on the ground are very different. Those realities have been communicated physically over the last year or so, and the signs have been ignored in lieu of narrative. And so now you have a situation where Israel has taken action that can't, narrative doesn't work on the battlefield. It may work on your impressions and what people think and what they'll support, but a bomb don't care about your narrative. It's either going to hit something or it's not going to hit something. Your interceptor missile is either going to knock something down or it's going to miss it. It doesn't care about your narrative. And so that's what we're seeing on the ground play out right now. Israel has embarked upon a course of action based on a narrative, and the reality on the ground is not supporting it. So now then they're kind of hanging out there. What do we do? We don't have enough interceptor missiles or offensive missiles to destroy Iran because it would take a long air campaign over many months, possibly even years. Israel doesn't have that kind of resources. We don't have those kind of resources. So then what are you going to end up doing? And what kind of cost are you going to have? Because now that you see that because the reality is that the integrated air defense system is not impervious, Israel is getting hammered all over the place. Major facilities are getting hit. Research facilities in the last couple of days that's really set Israel back in a number of different areas have been hit. And who knows how much farther the target list is going to go. And that's the cost of making policy based on a narrative at the exclusion of the actual ground truth reality. And how we're going to get out of this one, I just don't really know. At some point, somebody's going to have to just acknowledge reality and base policy on it, or things are going to get a lot worse.
Sorry, just yeah, one more final question. Sorry. If the United States doesn't get directly involved and limits itself to only resupplying Israel, to what extent can it does it have the ability to replenish Israeli arms? I'm thinking then missiles to strike Iran, but also the interceptive missiles because
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So bear in mind that maybe 3 weeks ago, Volodymyr Zelensky was complaining that he was promised 20,000 interceptor missiles by then Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and he was complaining that they got diverted to Israel. Israel has been using them at a very high clip. According to Western media, Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, even those now are running low. So you've had Ukraine still pleading for any more. They want more. They got 12. They want Patriot batteries. Well, it's not even a matter of the batteries as much as it is the interceptor missiles. And you had Secretary of State Rubio about a month ago and sent a testimony saying we don't have any more to give to Ukraine. Well, that was before this war started and before this, saturation of the use of all these interceptor missiles. So now then, how we're going to have to either get into our strategic reserve, what we need for our own national security, or we're just going to have to tell them we don't have it. But one way or the other, this can't be sustained very long. And I don't know the number because I don't have access to the secret actual inventory of how many we have. But I do know that our ability to generate them and in factories and whatnot is very, very low. So you can't sustain a war based on that. So some hard decisions are going to be forced on leaders here pretty soon if this doesn't get resolved by diplomacy.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to pick your brain. It's yeah, it's always interesting to speak with people with this military background to understand what's happening. So thank you again for your time, and yeah, hope you'll consider coming back on one time. Thanks.
Love to do it. Love to do it. Thank you very much.